Now, one of the topic that I want to talk about today is definitely something that I have been working with for a while now. It is one of the most important spaces and domains that we all interact with in our regular lives as well, because whenever we work with any web applications, be it as a user or as a developer, we do end up coming across this, and this technology is definitely enabling our lives for the better, and what that is called an application programming interface or an API. So APIs are basically a software intermediary that allow two applications to talk to each other. You can send in some information, and you get back some information after having that processed from an API. And really, when we talk about our web applications or even on our desktops, on our mobiles, APIs superpower our solutions because they allow us to add some sort of a logic to our user interfaces, to our yeah, and they enable us to really perform some amazing tasks with our applications. So we're going to learn how to build a very basic API today, and we're going to do so using one of the biggest industry standards in the world, and that is .NET. .NET is is an open source programming framework that supports a huge amount of spaces ranging from web, the desktop. We've got support for machine learning, we've got support for IoT, gaming. .NET is definitely one of the most powerful technologies in the world, and that is what we're going to be using today. Along with that, we're going to try our hands on a bit on just a basic database as well, and we're going to be live coding along the way. So this is a fully hands-on session, and I would love to have you all stay active with me as well. I'm going to bring up my screen now and put Zoom here on the side for the time being. And just before I jump into building, I want to help you all at least get yourself downloaded and started as well. So my screen should be up for you now, I believe. If someone could let me know, that would be lovely. Shubham, if you could just help out with that.
Yes, it's visible.
Awesome. Awesome. So the first thing we need to do is hop over to the ASP.NET website. For that, all you need to just type in is ASP.NET. That's really how easy it is. And once you reach the website, you're gonna get to know a little bit about ASP.NET, what all different facilities it allows you to work with, be it web apps, APIs, microservices. It tells you a bit more. It shows you learning resources. Of course, there are benchmarks around performance, which is amazing, right? It lets you know exactly what you're in for, and you can just download just by clicking on this little button here. And as soon as that is done, it's going to show you a few options. For this session, we're going to be working with .NET 5, so I will recommend going ahead with that. In a lot of instances, you might end up using .NET Core 3.1 as well, as it is present in long-term support. However, since .NET 5 is the most modern one, that's what we're going to be going with. So if you're following along, you can go ahead and download .NET SDK from here. Along with that, once we build our API, when we're using a database, we're going to be using Azure's services for us in this session. Now, if you're a student who needs Azure credits, there is some free resource that Microsoft provides for that as well. But before I get to the resource, um, I'll tell a little bit about Azure. Azure is Microsoft's cloud computing platform. It is a public cloud that enables you to utilize resources around deployment, for a huge plethora of services ranging from deployment and hosting, of course, to databases, compute services, DevOps, machine learning. So it's definitely one of the largest, most impactful cloud platforms in the world. And you can actually download it for free as well. As a student, Microsoft has a provision for you to get $100 worth of credits and free developer tools with a variety of facilities for free, such as their machine learning offering, SQL Server. We've got Azure App Service, we've got Linux virtual machines. So there's some great resources in there for you all right now to avail for absolutely free. And for that, all you need to do is just type in aka.ms/a4s. So it's really that easy to get started. Now, once you have these downloaded, first thing I'm going to do is we're going to just create a basic web API using Visual Studio. Visual Studio is definitely the IDE of choice for anything .NET. It is also another free tool that you can actually get started with for free. So I'll go ahead, I'll share that link as well. Whenever you go to the Visual Studio website, as soon as you just click on it, it will show you again, once again, it tells you all about the IDE, it tells you how it is impactful. Of course, we've got our preview offering as well, and it shares the how it's connected with cloud and how it has support for Azure as well. So it's really that easy to get started with Visual Studio. All you need to do is just hover over here and click on Community 2019. Um, the 2019 version of Visual Studio is the most stable one right now. It is the one currently in production. So I will recommend going ahead and downloading 2019. If you want to go with the preview, totally your option, not a problem at all. But I personally use the 2019 edition and it's great. So you can go ahead with that. And if you look at the community edition, that is free for individual developers, for students, for open source work. So community edition is the one you can go ahead with. Once all of these are installed, we'll go ahead, we'll go to Visual Studio and we'll create a little basic web API for us first. So as I go ahead, as I click on create a new project, I'm gonna see there's this entire page with a variety of different options here for me. And as I scroll down, it shows me, of course, we've got ASP.NET Core Web Apps, we've got Web APIs, which is what we're gonna be using. So I'll be coming back to this right now. We've got console applications that you can work with. There, of course, is support for full stack applications as well. And then, we've got Windows desktop application support. We'll have Xamarin somewhere in there as well. So it's a nice large variety of templates that we have to get started with new projects. That's exactly how solutions like Visual Studio are super powering your development, because they help you get started so quickly. They are improving efficiency for us on an everyday basis. So I'm just going to scroll back up and we'll go over to ASP.NET Core Web API. Even if you can't find it when you install it, all you need to do is just type in Web API and it's going to show up for you. So as we found ASP.NET Core Web API, let's go ahead, click on next. We'll see that we can name our project here, of course, and set the location for it. In today's session, since of course this is probably the first time a lot of you are working with APIs, we're going to go with a simple to-do application. So I'm just going to go ahead and write to-do API. I do want to change the location personally, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. For a second, just bring it to my desktop for now, that this makes things convenient. And we're going to go ahead, click on next. For this, of course, we've got different target frameworks. We've got .NET Core 2.1 and 3.1, which are in long-term support. Like I mentioned, there are going to be instances when you're working with .NET Core 3.1. In this case, however, we're going to be going with .NET 5. So I'm going to go click on that. For now, we do not need an authentication type, but depending on enterprise use cases and circumstances, you definitely have the option to set it up from the very beginning as well. In this situation, however, we're just going to go ahead with none. And it's a good idea to leave the configure for HTTPS and enable OpenAPI support checked in. OpenAPI support definitely allows us to document our APIs a lot better. And we do have support for that with this template as well through Swagger. So I'm going to show how that works once our initial API is formed, and we're going to go through different aspects of it and then modify it for our own work. Do make sure to keep it configured for HTTPS though. That is definitely something that kind of eases things up for us. So once you've reached this step, you can go ahead, you can create your API. It's gonna create a little project for you. And this takes a few seconds, so we're just gonna let it happen. Yep. Now, as soon as my API is created, you will see that on my Solution Explorer, there are a few different options and a few different folders and files that we can see. Before jumping to any of these, we're just gonna go ahead and run it for a second. So for as I see all of these options, There we have the option to start debugging, start without debugging. Of course, there's a profile and there's quite a few different steps. For now, we're gonna go ahead and we're gonna start debugging the application for a sec. And for that, we'll just go ahead, you can press F5 or go up to the debug um, folder and just start from there as well. So we're gonna just start it once just to see how it looks, how it works, and look at how we get our Swagger documentation as well. And we're gonna get to how all of this is formed. So that's just after the demo that we're gonna see. Yeah, our API should be functional now. It's just loading up for us. So we'll need to give it a second there. This seems to be a bit delay. Yeah, that's all right. So as this opened up, you can see that we have a little user interface that allows us to see what API we have active here and what request we have to send it over. Now that GET refers to an HTTP request, which is something. It's based on the HTTP transfer protocol. It allows us to interact with APIs. HTTP requests are a great way to do that, and HTTP requests are a big standard when it comes to REST APIs. And REST there, that stands for um, I believe it stands for representational state transfer. It really refers to just how, it's a format for how we develop APIs for the internet. So HTTP requests are a great way of really interacting with REST APIs. It's one of the standards there, of course. In this case, with Swagger, it really makes it convenient for us to interact with our API, because any request that we have, we can actually directly work within here. So huge convenience factor there for us. I'm gonna just go ahead, click on try it out, and execute it. So as you saw, as soon as I executed, as soon as we had a little GET request in there, the application gave back a response to us. It showed what code, what status code, what HTTP status code the response had, and it showed us a little response in a JSON format here. So that's exactly how we communicate with an API. That's at least in this case, we send in an HTTP request and we get back an HTTP response. Now that we've seen how it's documented here after after debugging with how these APIs are documented with Swagger, what sort of requests you can send over and get. Let's start exploring, because we're going to be modifying this little example, of course, for our own use to build a little API for ourselves. So I'm going to hop over. I'm just going to close this and hop back to our application here. The first thing that I want to go over and take you to is the startup.cs file that we have. Startup is a very important file. It is what configures our API for us. Here, as you open this, you'll be able to see that you can configure different services we have, including this one really cool one called, Swagger. That's exactly what we were seeing earlier. Swagger here allows us to document our APIs for us, and it's doing so with of course the open API format. So it's a great tool for you to use whenever you want to document your APIs and distribute them with the rest of the world. Then of course we've got configure here, which of course allows us to add specific services as well. It tells us how we can use our endpoints. It tells us how we can use routing. How it's mapping controllers. It allows us to set the usage for Swagger as well. And that's definitely very important, right? Because we when we're working with these APIs, when we need to make sure that our endpoints are set correctly, our documentation is set correctly, the exception page is there. So very important. And startup is going to be there in every single one of the .NET Web APIs as well. Next up, we have program.cs here, which is another little file. This is kind of what gets it started for us. As you look at it here, we have our main function, of course, which is getting this entire API to run. And as you see, you'll notice that it mentions, we have this little line here, which is basically allowing us to use the startup file that we have to configure our API. So this is again another mandatory feature of all of these APIs where we're definitely going to need this as well in our file. I think the third file we notice here is, of course, the weather forecast file. This is essentially what we call is a model. Because if you looked at the format, you would have seen that we were getting back the date, temperature in Fahrenheit, and a summary. So this is the information we were getting back from this API, and it's basically, the model or the entity is also what we use in our databases. It is an exact representation of each of those rows, and this is what allows us to communicate and get back data. If we, so and with model specifically, you might have actually noticed it in a major design pattern called the MVC, which is the model view controller. Having this, of course, separation allows us to really separate different aspects of the of our products, be it separating the UI or the view from our logic and along with the controller and the database, of course. With the APIs, though, we don't have views, but it is structured in a similar manner. So we're gonna have our controllers which allow us to actually communicate with the with the business logic directly here in this case. The controller is, of course, what your UI would interact with as well, had you been building a full stack application with a user interface. So next up, we're we're gonna go ahead. We're gonna look into what this controller looks like here. With this controller, you can see we've got a few string summaries. We've got this little thing here called an iLogger, and I'm gonna jump into this as well and tell you what this is all about. Along with that, we have, of course, a little constructor for us, and then we've got our get request here for us. Now, when we look at this entire structure, you're also going to see some of these attributes here. All right. So let's go at it from top to bottom. As we enter here, you'll see a little attribute called the API controller. This is here, of course, because this designates that this entire file here, this class here, is a controller for the API, which means whenever you're interacting, the functions here can actually be created, of course, as for different requests as APIs. And the best part is, whenever you hover over this, Visual Studio tells you exactly what that little piece of information is about. So as you can see, it shows that this indicates a type and all derived types, that are used to serve HTTP API responses. Here we have a route which basically tells us how you're gonna get to this each specific API here. Now that little thing there in the brackets, controller, is used to represent the controller name, which in our case is gonna be weather forecast. So weather forecast here is our controller name, and for each of these functions, what happens is that when we just quickly state HTTP get here, it's gonna utilize the name here, as the name for our API. This is, of course, something that you can customize as well, which we will look into very, very soon. So that of course is, just as we go through the start of our little API here. Next up, we have the get request, which is what we saw earlier. As we clicked on execute, we got back a little range of different of these functions, right? RNG, of course, here is a little random sort of a value that we're getting. And what this allows us to do is that basically between this range here that we have, it randomly selects and returns these values to us in the format of the model. Because when we saw the weather forecast file, similarly you'll see that we've got the file here, and it allows us to go through this range and return values in the format of an array in that specific order. There is the return type for this is an IEnumerable, which really refers to a collection that you can iterate through. That's really what IEnumerable is. So, and in this case, the data type for that is weather forecast, which is the class or the model that we saw earlier. But of course, when you're going to get started with these, that's not the only piece of information you're interacting with, right? So for now, we're going to start removing some of this, and we're going to start creating our own information here, right? So that we can create our to-do API as we've been discussing. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to delete this file here for us. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to delete weather forecast as well. First thing here that we need to do, of course, is have a little model for our to-do API that we have. So I'm going to go ahead, I'll create a little folder here for us as well. And that's just so that I can really keep my information a little more clear, a little more separate. So we're going to have a folder called models. And within that, we're going to add a class for us. I clicked here on new item, but if you would have gone back, you can see that, class is there directly as an option as well. And as you click on this, you'll see there's a variety of different options that we have. You also see different content pages, different JS, Angular controllers, and these sort of files. And that is, of course, because the web APIs are actually structured like the MVC applications, right? So it has a variety of these options that we have available. We're gonna go ahead with a normal class for now though, and we're gonna just rename this to to-do, right? So as you see, it creates a little class for us and it adds the namespace automatically, which is according to what we had said earlier. Um, with the namespace, actually, I just realized that some of you might not be aware of what a namespace is. So a namespace is really a collection of similar sort of classes, and it works similar to a package, but with the namespace, we're not restricted to just to a certain directory. So it's similar to how a package works, and we can actually use this to group different similar similar but different classes as in one sort of a unit. So with the to-do, we're going to add a few different items. We're going to first add the name, for example, and I'm going to add a getter and a setter here as well. We'll add a description. Oh, sorry. I did have to add a string there as well. With the description as well. Again, we're going to need one of those. And I guess we can add a date and a time, maybe. So for datetime, we have a format as well. In this case, we just we'll keep it as we'll name it as time, but we will let it be both the date and the time, right? For now, I mean that's just convenient that for us, so we'll just leave it at that. But you can actually set these functions here as very specific cases as well. Like if in case you want to set it just as the date or just as the time, what you can do is we can add a little attribute here, as I click on data type. I know it shows me a little red mark, but I can actually use Visual Studio to tell me which package I need, which reference I need to use this facility. So I'll just add data type here, and I can actually I can actually definitely use a variety of of features here as well. So, if I do this, it's going to set it just as the date. If I use this, it's going to use date time. There's a few different options here. Yeah, there are a few different options that we have here. So I can just set any one of these. If it's a great way to actually designate what sort of information we are getting in these. For now, though, we'll just leave it at date time. And one thing I forgot earlier, that is also what we need, is of course an ID field. We're going to use the ID here as well, right? To designate what this information is. So let's have ID there as well. And that kind of does it for the model with us, right? I think that was comfortable so far. However, with the model, we of course need to utilize a database as well, right? In order to really help us get started, actually get started using this API. So, we have our API model ready. The next thing we're gonna need is is a way to communicate with our database and the database as well. We need both of those. So I'm gonna just hop off from Visual Studio for a minute to quickly go and get started with our database. For that, as I mentioned, I'm gonna be using Azure. So I'm just gonna go ahead, log on to Azure, and I'll use my account here. We'll go ahead. As it's mentioned, you're gonna get a little demo of how Azure works out as well, which is actually pretty cool, to be honest. Yes, so as you know, as I've logged in, you can see we have our interface for Azure. We've got different resources we can actually use, information about our existing account as well. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly going to go create a resource. And what we need here is Azure SQL, right? So as I clicked on Azure SQL, this allows me to create a SQL Server resource. I'm going to quickly go ahead, create one for me. And in this instance, I want to use a SQL database, not a SQL VM or a SQL managed instance, but a SQL database. And we're using a single database. You can, of course, use a database server or an Elastic pool to use multiple databases as well. In this case, and you can actually read about these different options here within all of these. So I'm going to go ahead to create a single database for myself. And you know I'm creating it here. As I clicked on that, I can select different details about the database that I want to create. And a resource group here is really a sort of a grouping of different items that we have in our Azure different resources, and it allows us to get billing for them together, and or just have similar sort of resources grouped together. So as you can see, I have various of these created already. I'm gonna go ahead, create a new one for this, and we're gonna call it to do API for now. So that's a name. And for the database name, let's just keep it as to do API. I mean, that's totally all right. We can do that. As a server goes, I see that we do not have a server already, so I'm gonna create a new one. For this, we need to have our server information ready. And of course, in this case, it seems like this is already taken. So what I'm gonna go is I'm gonna name it as to do API Aditya for now. Oops. Yeah, that works. It's available. Within this, we're gonna need a little login as well. So I'm just gonna call it Aditya. Within the password, let's see if it allows me to create. Okay. So for this, we need a few different aspects. It needs at least three of the following. We need either something that's uppercase, lower characters, numbers, or non-alphanumeric characters, and we need a mix of those. So I'm just gonna go ahead, change my password once there, and we should be good to go as this is done. Of course, with any password, you need to have the confirmation there, right? And again, you can actually set the location of this server. Normally it's a good idea to keep it somewhere near you, so I'm going to go ahead and search if we have an Indian option, and we do. So Central India is the one I'm going to choose. Now that I've gone ahead with that, a server is created for us. I don't want to use a SQL Elastic Pool in this case because of course I'm not actually using multiple databases for now. But it's totally all right if you want to do that. It's a great way for you to actually manage performance and you know if you have multiple of these around. Next up, we have our compute plus storage, which again is a very important factor because this of course tells you where what sort of compute services your database is actually deployed on, and you can actually select a different a variety of options here. We've got general purpose options, we've got business critical or hyperscale um, categories, which allow us to actually set to pick compute services that you need for enterprise level work, for use cases that are highly business critical. In this case, you also get to see what your pricing tier is like, and that you see is pretty expensive, to be honest. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna see if I can actually decrease a bit of this. So I'm gonna go ahead and go back to our basic and standard tiers. In this case, we can just go ahead with basic because we really, I mean, with basic, of course, if you see there's a drastic cost difference, right? With standard, of course, we get some better sort of resource power, as well as we get a chunk of data storage there as well. And premium, of course, it's just a different way of how you can select what works best for you. But the idea behind these different options is really the same, to help you decide which is the best database for you. So I'm just going to go ahead to standard and get one. You can always go back to basic and use that as well. We kind of actually really do need just the basic one in our case here. So I mean, actually we can just go ahead with basic. That's totally all right. Next up, we have to set up. We have to decide which option we want for our backup storage. And this again is very important because in case we have a scenario where our information, that there's an issue with the database and we have loss of information, then we don't want a scenario where we lose our data, right? This might seem like a small problem when we're just starting and we're learning, but in situations in the real world, as we're working on larger applications, it becomes a very important aspect because there are a lot of entities that depend on this factor. So we're gonna go ahead with geo redundant backup storage for now. Next up, we have to set our network connectivity, right? In our scenario here, we'll just keep it as a public endpoint. That's totally all right. We definitely, it's a good idea. With a private endpoint, I guess what would happen is you would need to go through a subnet. But with a public endpoint, you can directly connect to it. We're gonna keep it public. Among the firewall rules, I guess we should allow Azure services because we're going to be deploying this API later and just putting it up there as well. And we do want to add the current client IP address because as I work with the database from my device, I want to make sure that I can actually connect to it and use it. So we're going to keep that option there. Next up, we have security, which allows us to actually add a security package to our SQL server as well. For now, we don't necessarily need this. For a more enterprise use case, this could actually be a good idea to protect your information as well. We have a few additional settings, whether we want to start with a blank database or restore from a backup. In this case, I don't really have a backup, so I'm going to go ahead from the basic one with, with database collation that really defines the rules that sort and compare data. We're going to let it be the default one. And of course, we have our maintenance window in case that there is a time when when there need to be some maintenance updates that need to be performed. It's going to happen in the specified time here, and we have the system default with us, so we're going to go ahead with that. Tags, of course, are key value pairs that allow us to name our resources. So we're just going to go ahead with name. and add to API. This is not something you have to mandatorily do, but it just allows you to kind of categorize your resources a lot better. Next up, before you jump further, it will allow you to review and create, and it'll see what all you've selected. It's always a good idea to glance over this in case you want to be able to know what you've gone ahead and created, right? So as soon as this is done, we can go and we can click on create. It's gonna validate the different settings for us, and yeah, that's definitely that's gonna be good for us. We need to go review and just wait a bit for us. Now, while this deployment is in progress, I'm gonna hop over back to our application. In order to communicate with SQL databases in .NET, we have an amazing um, library called Entity Framework, which makes it very easy and very comfortable to utilize these databases and the resources. So next thing we have to do is really get Entity Framework installed for us, and that is done using the NuGet package manager. Now, NuGet is another open resource that we have for all of us. It allows us to download different packages and libraries. If you are a web developer that uses JavaScript, you might know NPM. NuGet is a similar equivalent, but with NuGet as well, it's an extremely large library. It has amazing open source support. So we have a huge number of packages available for public use. And for this, you can actually select your package source as well. I'm going to keep it at NuGet.org because that is the open global standard. Right now, if you see, it'll also show you what NuGet packages are installed. And in this case, we have Swashbuckle here. Swashbuckle is actually what allows us to use Swagger. So we're going to let it be there. Definitely keep it around. You can also see any of these that need updates. For now, we're good to go on this. So I'm not going to update this immediately, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to download Entity Framework for us. And I'm going to do it for SQL Server. It seems like I put in a little typo in there. Should have been entity. And as you see, I've got a few of these options here already. I'm gonna go ahead. I'm gonna select entity framework or select the project I want it for and install it for us. Make sure you select your version correctly because in this case we have ASP.NET 5, so we can use the latest versions that are you know version 5 onwards. But when you're using ASP.NET Core 3.1, then chances are these versions may not work. So we need to go back and select the apt version for us. And it definitely allows you to manage that very comfortably. You can just select the version from there. You can also actually set this information directly from your package manager console as well. It also shows us what all different services we're installing. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to do that. All right. Seems like this is installed for us now. So as that happened, this updated for us. You can see that we have this version installed, which is the latest stable one. Like I mentioned, if you're using the older versions, if you're using .NET Core 3.1, you might want to go back to one of these options. And just similarly, it has support for all the different versions of .NET that we have as well, which is great, right? It's definitely great because we this is what we really need to work around with that. So yeah, in this case, entity framework is installed. You can actually also go back to installed and you'll find that it is there for us. Next up, what we're gonna do, I think in the meantime, in our database must be created, and yes, it has. So after this, we're gonna go ahead. We're gonna create a data context, which really is what allows us to communicate with our database through entity entity framework. So that's what we're gonna do next with us. Mhm. So let me just go to our resource. I'll just see, that this is functional. We've got our server name there. We've got our database connection strings there. All of this information is here with us. The password is not really something that I need to hide right now, but I'm gonna add that, as we set up our entity framework for us. So next thing we're gonna go back. We're gonna go back to our application here, and we're gonna create a database context for ourselves. I normally do that in another file. I in a file, I just go ahead, I do that, and sorry, not in another file, in another folder, and I name that folder data for myself. That's just something that I prefer doing. It kind of makes things a little more comfortable for me personally. So that's really my preferred way of going about it. But you can feel free to go over this in however way you prefer. That's totally all right. That's not an issue at all. All right. So I'm gonna go ahead. I've created a new folder for myself. I'll just name it to data, and within data, I'll create a class. The class I'm gonna name as to do context. Again, you're free to name it whatever you want. Now we're gonna set this up as our data context. So we need to add a few details. As this is a database context, we're gonna need to inherit information from the DB context class of entity framework. Now, right now you see that it shows a little red underline because it can't find it here. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means we're not referencing entity framework right now. So all I need to do for that is press control dot, and that's going to show me these options once again. You can actually right click and find these options from quick actions or refactorings as well, and you can use the shortcut. So I use the shortcut typically. As you see, it'll show you different options of what you can do about this. And in this case, we're going to be using entity framework. So as soon as I do that, it that marks up as green, and that means that now my class here is actually inheriting the information from this DB context instance that we have. We're gonna create a little constructor for us next, and this again is gonna be important because this is how we're getting the database context options, the settings, to actually set this as our data context. So for that, we're gonna use DB context options. And within that, of course, we add to context, which is the data context that we're creating, right? We're gonna name it as options. This options here again is actually inherited from the options from our DB context. So that's again something we need to do. And for every constructor, of course, you need a little class. Although in this case, we're not actually adding something here, so we don't need to worry. We're gonna create one more little thing called a DB set. Now, a DB set is greater in its own place because a DB set actually allows us to directly communicate with the database, to get information, to add information, to update all our different the model that we've created. It'll allow us to actually work with the database in this format. So any link queue queries or language integrated queries that we have, which is a part of C# and .NET, will be translated into queries against the database if we use a DB set. So for the DB set, we'll use the model that we created earlier, that was to do. And we're just gonna go ahead, add a reference to this. Where we can name it whatever we want. I mean, whatever table that way we want, we can just name it that. So in this case, we'll keep it as to dos. And once again, we're back to the getter and setter, right? So we can just do that here. We're also gonna, go ahead and we're gonna add some information to our startup, because we want to be able to actually use this service here in our database, right? So the next step is to add this DB context to our services here. That's gonna happen just in this configure services class, and we're gonna go ahead, just added a few lines. We're gonna add our DB context. Before I even do that, you'll see that we have a lot of different options here. And this is exactly why it's so great when you're working with Visual Studio. It really enhances your development experience, makes it comfortable for you to work with this. So, as we add our DB context, this is also where we need to mention our database context that we've created earlier, because this information is going to be used, right? And when we initialize this, we're going to need to add our SQL Server options here. So I go ahead, I create a little variable called options, and with C sharp, when I'm working with C sharp, I can actually use a lambda expression to initialize this DB context options builder format instance. And if you think about it, you would have seen something very similar there in the constructor, right? When you were um, actually when you were creating the database context. So in this instance, we're going to use SQL Server. We installed this, this little package very recently, right? So we're gonna be using SQL Server. This is actually where you would add your connection string for the database. Normally, it is not a very good practice to directly add the string. So what we use is we use the information from our configuration to get that connection string for us. That way you can actually keep any private details um, hidden, so it adds an extra protection layer for you. It's normally a good practice, so we're going to be using that. So I'm just going to add configuration dot get connection string, and within this we're going to add the name of our variable, the one that we want. I'm just going to keep it as to do db. The connection strings that we use in the configuration actually go here in app settings.development.json. We utilize this to add our connection strings. So what we do is, after our logging here, we're just gonna add another little thing called connection strings. This is a JSON file. We're utilizing this JSON for our purpose here. We name it to do. I think it was to do's DB. Let me just go ahead and check back once again. To do DB, not to do's DB. Now we go back to Azure, to the resource we had, and we copy this little connection string that we had. This, of course, is something that's very important, and I do need to add my password here. In this case, I set it to something very comfortable to remember. You can actually make this a lot more difficult as well, but it's important to keep a track of what you create here, because this is something that you will actually need whenever you communicate with your database. So it's a very important aspect of it, right? So we've just saved it for now, and this connection string is what our database will actually end up using later on as well. So the next step that we have, of course, is to, use this to create a controller for us. So I'm going to go back to controller. I'm going to go, we're going to check out our scaffolded items here, see if, we have an API controller option there, which we do. That's great, right? Because this makes life so convenient for us whenever we need to work with our database. It's great. We're going to create a controller for ourselves. What this will do is, and then this, you see, we can use setup, select what model we want to do is the model we created. It also finds the database context that we created for us, and next thing, of course, we need to select the name of our controller. So I'm just going to keep it as to-do controller, and I'm going to add this. So it'll create a controller with all different CRUD operations for me. How great is that? I mean, we're using Entity Framework. It's creating this entire little thing for us. So it's going to give us all the CRUD APIs directly that allow us to communicate with our database. And we're going to check those out. We're going to go through them as well. This takes a little time from on occasion that happens really. So we can just wait for, I mean, a couple of minutes. It's just gonna get through that process. But once this is done, we can directly work with our data. Actually, we'll have a little step before we work with our database as well. There's gonna be one little step in the middle there, but we're gonna get to that. Okay, seems like we have an error, and yeah, it seems like we had a missing package. So that's totally all right. No worries. All we need to do is we'll just close this for a second. Hop back over to NuGet Package Manager, and go back to browse, and we're gonna search for entity. Keep mistyping this. Entity framework core dot design. Seems like we need to have this installed as well because this is necessary for scaffolding. So uh, we do need it there, right? Definitely important. So I mean this takes, again, we're just installing this. It's gonna take a little second to update. We're good on that end. So now we should be up. It should be able to create our controller for us. I'm gonna go back and go back to API controller, select my model, my context, name. All right. And we're gonna update this information for us. So it's generating our code for us. That's it. So as soon as we did this, it actually created an API controller for us. And if you see this utilizes our all the information that we had existing, and it's creating our CRUD APIs for ourselves on its own. And that's definitely great. That makes life so easy because we now have our all our create, read, update, and delete functions already created for us. So there's just one more thing left to do, and that is, of course, to be able to use the database, we actually need to create the tables in the database, right? It needs to be up and running. So for that, there's a little thing we need to do, and that, of course, is have our table there. What we're gonna do, we're gonna use the migrations feature of EF Core for our work. Where we're gonna go for that, we'll use the command line, the package manager command line. So I'm just gonna go back here, open the package manager console for us, and we're gonna add a migration here. All right, and we're gonna keep it initial create. This is actually gonna create our table and database for us. And yeah, it tells us that we need to update our entity framework tools, which is all right. I mean, we're all okay for now. There is one little step after this as well, and that is update database. So we're just going to do that as well. As soon as this is done, this is actually reflected in our database. So now our API is actually ready to use. Oops, seems like I've added it on top. Never mind. I'm just gonna keep it down here within or close it. Now our database is actually ready to use. If you see, it creates a little migrations folder which shows us what exactly has happened here. So when like with this up function here, it creates this table for us and it shows what sort of information is in there. So for ID, it's created a little identity table which increments on its own. It's an auto increment sort of a file. And then we have our name, description, and time which are available for us as well. So we're gonna run and try this API once and see if it works. I really hope it does. But let's get it up and running and check it out. So as I see, because it created the controller for us, we can actually see all the different APIs. First step, of course, is to create a little piece of information for us. In our case, we actually do not need to change anything in the ID right now. I'm just going to remove that for a second because as you saw, it was set as an identity sort of a class. I do realize how that can become a little issue at times, when we're working. So we're going to make a little more further update to our application as soon as we're done testing. So actually, I'm at writing. I'm just going to write for our first tutor. We'll just say, um, say hi. Um, we were going to just describe it as say hi to your friends. And as you see, this actually automatically sets the time at which we just started off with this. So I'm gonna leave it as is, and I'm gonna execute this little function. As you can see, it created a little this little row in our table already. It did that on its own, and it's given us a response telling us what exactly has been added. Now, if I go back and I just say add another little to get groceries, for example. And I'm just gonna add a description as buy groceries. Okay, sorry, slight typo. For lunch. And I mean, this is actually an automatic time that was set for us. If you reset it, it would have reset to the current time, but I'm just gonna go ahead and update it on my own. So I'm just gonna add 2 minutes in there. It's okay. I mean, this is just something we're doing for our test case. I'm gonna execute it this again as well. So as you saw that ID got auto incremented. And that happens because this ID field has been created on its own for us. If suppose I go back to ID and try to set it for myself manually, let's see what happens if I do that. Right. We definitely need a little workaround on that as well to make sure that this doesn't trouble us in the future. So I'm going to get to that as well. If I try to add 3 on my own and see, add ID to model, I'm just going to write see if ID can be manually added, and we'll execute this and we'll see what happens. And we got a nice little error that told us, why that, we can't do this. And this basically happens because the ID is an identity field in the database. So it's something that auto increments. We can't actually update this field. But there's a chance if we've got an API, right, we've got those fields, we're expecting that we want to use all the fields we have. So that can create a confusion. So the next thing we actually do here is actually create a little thing known as a DTO, which is basically a data transfer object. What this does is, I mean, it just allows us to select specific fields that we want to use for our communication. If we want to hide specific fields at specific points of time and then map them accordingly. So we're actually going to do that as well. Before that, we can just see, if we want to see what all different little to-dos we added. And as you see, we can actually get all of these. Fun fact, if you have a get request, you can actually directly run it in your browser as well, and it will show you the responses there. Right now for me, it shows it to me directly in this nice, comfortable JSON response because I have a little extension called JSON view. Otherwise, you'd probably see it in a sort of a plain text format, like you saw in like for like I guess a few milliseconds there. Then of course we've got an API to get back a specific value as well. And I'll show you how these are mapped, where we're gonna go through these as well. So, now as I go back to make our DTO, we're gonna go through these different aspects here. But it's a lovely tool here that we have because as you see, Swagger allows us to go through all of these details comfortably. And guess what? You were working with a database, so you didn't have to write any SQL at all. So, if that kind of freaks you out, like it used to freak me out earlier, this actually helps you get started very comfortably working with databases as well. And then you can further on learn more about how databases work in their essence. So I'm just going to go back. We're going to close debugging. All right. Migrations, we can just keep this down for now. And let's create our DTO first, and we're then gonna, go ahead and we'll work on our controller next. So I'm just gonna copy this. Sometimes copying is a good idea. It saves your time as well. So it's okay to copy once in a while. And I'm gonna name this as to do DTO. So now that we're there, just copying these back. Okay. And it really depends, you need to know how you want to you actually use your information as well. I'm actually also going to go ahead and create a little function for myself here. Okay. Public. And this I'm basically doing so that, when I want to get this back from my DTO, it basically initializes this for me and sends it back or automatically. So in the format of this little model. So I'm just going to name it as convert DTO. And we'll take the format here as to do DTO in this case. We're gonna call it Visual Studio is great. It gives us all of these options that we can actually use. And I'll just set it as return new to do. And we're gonna set name equal to do DTO dot name. We're gonna set description equal to DTO dot description. And then of course, last but not the least, time. That again goes back to the same format to do DTO dot time. I personally have a little habit. I just kind of try and space it out a little better. And if this kind of gets a little uncomfortable for you to see, what you can also do is you can actually just shift it all to different lines. That's also something you can do. If you want to do that, of course is not mandatory. You can leave it as is as well. Okay. They're not going to show this again for now. So that is this, this function will allow us to convert our DTO to our entity. Now you see where entity framework comes for that model, that we've created. That is an entity that we have. So back to our controller now. We look at our controller, we see where we're getting all of this information from. And we see what response types we have. So we're going to go through this quickly. You saw that we had a data context. What this constructor here is doing is it's injecting the data context we created into another little instance of that. This is an example of what we call dependency injection. It allows us to actually inject specific services that we create into our controllers, and it allows for separation of our business logic. It works on the principle of a flow, a pattern called inversion. flow of control. So that's something you can look into later on as well. Not something you need to worry too much about. But yeah, that's basically an example of dependency injection that we have here. Next up, we go to our to-do API and we see, that this basically what it does is using our data context, it gets back the entire list of rows in our table and it converts them to an IEnumerable of the format of our object or our entity. And what you can actually do is, this thing gets converted basically to the format of a little an IEnumerable, but we can actually change this to a list as well, considering this is being converted to a list here. The reason, and I think another thing we have here is that this function here is being called asynchronously, so that of course is a little aspect there as well. Next up we have our get ID, which basically allows us to call it by ID, right? And if you notice in this format, basically with our controller, because our controller is our format for our API has been designated as API controller. What it does is it uses the request, the request we have, just that, and we don't actually have a specific action name there. We can set those for ourselves as well. Next thing, we have our put, um, the put command here, which allows us to update the values. This is the first place where we're going to use our DTO. So I'm just going to change this to do DTO. I'm also going to keep the naming here as well, just keeping it consistent, or let's see what it recommends us. Yeah, it's the same. Totally all right. So the next thing we need to do is we actually need to convert this DTO to the format of our to-do as well, right? So what I'm gonna do is, let's see, sorry. My bad. To-do dot, we need to get back the function, right? I'm gonna convert the DTO to this format here. So for that, we need to add our to-do DTO here. What this is going to do is it's going to return back a to-do to us using that little function we created. I'm just going to copy this because we're going to use this at different instances. When we return the information, we can just use the to-do directly. That is totally all right. We don't need to worry too much about that little part of it. But what this DTO will actually allow us to do is that, because we don't want to keep that ID and we don't want to make the mistake of having that, this just lets us change that aspect of it and, just get, like allow us to input it in that specific format. For the delete, we don't need to worry so much about it. So, and here, we see another little function called to do exists, which is being used at different instances, especially where we have our put value here, and then we have our other, the delete or the get functions. We need these in different places. Another very important part of why we use the DTO here in at least the put the put API as well is because if we want to actually allow the user to only edit specific aspects, this enables us to do that. So when we look at this basically to that same ID format, we will gonna need to set the ID for this as well. So I'm just gonna go ahead to do.id equal to the ID we're getting. That's definitely going to be important in case of put. Otherwise, this function doesn't work. It just sends back a bad request. Not a worry though. This is something that we've just managed on our own on that end. But it definitely helps us if we don't have that ID in the post value, because what otherwise is just going to happen is that you're going to keep getting that error back. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna run this for us. All right. And once this is functional, we're actually gonna deploy it right now as well. So it seems like we're ready to test our API. Let's hope it works. Yep, we're back to our API. Actually, you know what? Let's just get all of these and check it out. So as I went to the get all, we got back both of those that we created earlier because they're lying around in our database, right? Let's try and post a value. And now if you post it, you see that, we don't get that ID field in there. I'm just gonna name it as test DTO. I'm just gonna write test DTO in the API. I mean, of course, we can let it be to what it was. And we're gonna execute this, and it works, which is great for us. Next thing we're gonna try to do is update one. So let's use this function. I'm just gonna copy this for a second because I actually wanna use this value here that we have. We're gonna edit the first value that we had. So input, I'm just gonna go ahead, click on one. I will actually just add it here on my own. Say hi. And we're gonna change the description here to wish your friends and family. Great, nice. Let's see if it updates. And we have a 204, which means it would have updated. So because typically 2xx format is refers to the ones that update. So we can actually test that by just getting them all back. And yes, it did. It did update for us. The last one, I guess, that we need to test really is delete. So for that, we can just delete the second one that we had, I guess, because we're not really getting groceries right now. At least me for now. So I'm just gonna go ahead. I'm gonna delete that second one. All I need to do is enter the ID. And again, another code 204. You can actually modify these response formats to whatever you prefer. That's totally all right. For now, we're just going ahead with the defaults, but this is something you can do whenever you want. So I'm just gonna execute this once, and as advertised, it works. So great. Our API is functioning properly. The only thing we really need to do now is go ahead, deploy it. So I'm just gonna change this from debug to release. And let's rebuild this once. Rebuild succeeded. So I'm gonna go ahead now and click on publish. When I go ahead to publish, it actually allows me to see a variety of these options and possible targets where I might want to publish. In this case, we have Azure here. And considering I've tested it on IaaS, I'm gonna keep it on a Windows app service. All right. So I have Windows App Service selected. I can select whatever resources I want here in this case. Now that's not my account that I want. I want to use my other account because that does have more credits and some resources. So I'm just going to quickly enter my credentials. It'll take me a second, I guess. You know. Okay. Okay. That's good. Two-factor authentication is a great deal. It really um, you know helps in securing your information. So I'm just gonna add that here for a second. And you know, it's just gonna authenticate that for me. In the meantime, yeah, that's done. So in the meantime, I have my subscription here. I want to create a resource group. I don't have one already, right? For this at least. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna actually create a new one for myself. Voodoo API, and I'm gonna name it tutorials link. It's where we're gonna keep it as such. I seem to have removed the I from there. And what I want is I want to create a new app service for me in this case. So Oh wait, we actually had our little resource group that we created, right? To do API. So we're gonna use that. Why not? I want a new plan for this. I'm gonna keep Central India here. Here are the different sort of resources that I can actually use. We're gonna keep it at S1, which is one of the standard ones. It's good enough um, for this API at least. But if you want to select manually and try to understand more about these plans, just as we've gone to SQL Server, we actually can go ahead and you know create one directly from the Azure portal as well, and then select and deploy to that. So we're going to create an app service plan for ourselves and create it. Yeah, this is going to take a few seconds as well. Let's hop back to our database, see what we can do. We can actually edit our queries here directly as well. So, I can just go ahead and actually check it out right now and look at the database directly for myself. So here, of course, are our tables. And as you see, that to-dos table is the one that we created. That was the entity we have. If I, nope, I don't want to save that. If I just add a little query that allows us to select from this table, it seems like I have a little extra back in there. So I'm just gonna, yeah, that's because I've been typing and it just automatically, then, the moment I selected it, it just kind of added it in front. So I'm just going to run this. And you see, this is the information we've been seeing in our database. We can actually check it out here directly as well. Or we can use SQL Server Management Studio to do that for us. Let's see where we are with this. So it's created our app service instance for us. For now, we're not going to worry about deployment slots. We're just going to go ahead, click on next. We also can create an API management resource for us. So, if let's see, this is not something I've worked with in the past, but we can definitely utilize this. I'm going to change the resource group once again back to my to-do API. I don't have an API management service existing for me, but we can definitely, we can create a resource for us. I want to keep something close to me, so we're going to keep it back at Central India. Let's see. Let's create this and see what happens. API URL suffix. I guess we can just keep it as API MGMT for now. This is not something I've actually tried in the past. It's new for me as well, but it's definitely something that will ease things for us. So we'll check it out. Quick point to add: you can actually use Postman as well to communicate with these APIs. If you don't have Swagger, so that again, totally great for you. So yeah, it's creating the API and API management for us. And I'll tell you what, since we created that app service resource, we can actually go and check it out as well. Now that it was created. Sure, I mean, we're not saving this anyway. So I'll just go back to my resource group that I had. And we actually have our app service here created as well, which is nice. That's cool. Oh, we're back. It's creating the API and API management. This is actually something I haven't yet explored. So definitely, it's gonna be fun to see what happens there. But one thing we'll definitely need to add. So earlier on, since we were using that connection string, that was in our development settings. We're gonna need to add it here as well in our configuration here. So this is just loading, but I'm gonna do that as well so that we can actually use our database after it's deployed. Oh, seems like it's gonna publish our API now. As we're waiting here, it's gonna push these details up to our app service. Okay, it's ready to publish. That's great. So we're gonna publish now. Let me in the meantime go back to my settings. Just gonna copy this and I will go ahead and add it. I think it's still it's currently publishing and installing it. It's restarting the web app for me now. Awesome. Awesome. I think I might have made one little mistake, however, and that is I forgot to actually change to remove Swagger from the development settings into a production. So that's one little thing I missed out on. I'm gonna do that as well. Otherwise, you won't end up seeing it at all. But first, let's create a connection string for us. It's gonna keep it the same as 22db, which is the one that we had. I'm gonna copy my connection string here, select SQL Azure, and we're gonna save it. Publishing encountered an error. Yeah. What happened is that we actually weren't able to generate Swagger there. So I'm just gonna change that and then we'll publish again. Just removing this and we'll add this here. Now I guess it should publish. Okay. Well, we seem to be getting an error. Let me check I mean, okay. Where are we getting the output log here? Mm, But we do have add Swagger gen here, which is okay. That's funny. Not the issue I was actually expecting to see. Okay, show that startup. It's a great thing that we're facing this because debugging is a very general part of actually building. And one thing I want to mention is that if you face errors, it's totally okay to actually go and search about them. So we're gonna do that as well. So let's see what error we get here. And Stack Overflow, of course, is here for the rescue. Mm-mm-mm. Okay, I'm not sure if that was the error. Um, I'm just gonna add Azure App Service deployment, and we're gonna see what happens. Because we're having this little issue here. We did change that. We changed that and we moved it out. So that kind of confuses me. But I'm gonna change the format here a bit. Let's see if that kind of helps us. This gets tricky. Debugging is always tricky. And that automatically changed it to car for me. That shouldn't be there at all. And it seems like we don't have a Swagger endpoint. That's weird. Want to see if we get some fixes here. But this is definitely confusing. In any case, even if you're not using Swagger, you don't have to do that. You can actually go ahead and work without as well. I'm gonna hop back and check out, see where I'm going wrong, because this happens from time to time, and it's totally all right to make these mistakes. Looks like I've figured that point out at least. Yeah, that clears it up for us. Let's hope this deploys now. Because I mean, we are using Swagger UI, so I mean, it should work for us. It's not that, we've forced it to not use that, and we've got Swagger Gen in there. Publish once again. Hoping it works this time. It's a funny thing because we have had Swagger Gen in there. So this kind of really confuses me as to why we're facing this information, this little issue here. But in any case, what I'll do is I'll also look at another sort of an example that I've had. I mean, that should kind of help me out there. So let's just keep this aside for a second. Um, I mean, a Swagger is set up all right. That's not the issue here. Okay. I guess we might just have to keep it in both and not just one of the two. Wow, this is definitely a tricky issue. Absolutely apt for the circumstance as well, but I'm gonna keep it in the development branch too, so that I mean, I hope this really fixes it out. Or what we can just do is we can try changing this to Swagger. I mean, that would help out. I'm just gonna do that as well. But I kind of hope this works out. Um, these issues happen from time to time. Not always, the best possible scenario, but well, that does happen. One more possible thing that I could do here is I could actually make sure that you know this is something that I've seen that works and from time to time in other instances and other cases as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and try with this once. I'll just rebuild this and then we'll try publishing it. I mean, the other way, of course, is to actually put it up on GitHub and then we can try deploying from there. So let's see. The other, I mean, it could be possible that we're getting some issue with API management. I'm not able to find out the exact reason for this error, which is funny. But because we have had Swagger Gen, um, you know, in this entire situation. But anyway, never mind. This is something that we end up with an error from time to time. I mean, we've got our Swagger documentation here as well, and we've got Swagger Gen in there. So let's see. Just gonna copy this once. Probably my last attempt at deploying this. I'm gonna see if I can just keep this as well. This isn't something that creates errors for us. If I rebuild, if this works, it's definitely gonna be funny. Well, okay. For now, I guess we can. It's okay to not worry too much about it. I mean, it's funny that this is happening, and it definitely shouldn't. I can also check out our published profiles here for a second, but we'll let it be for now. It's something that needs to be debugged from time to time. Happens, issues happen, and that's all right. I can actually deploy it directly from here as well, so I'll see if that works out okay. But for that, what I can do is I'll just publish it to GitHub once. We'll create a Git repository, and I'm going to use an existing remote. I have one with me already, so I can actually use that. I'm just going to publish this to GitHub for a second. Let's see. We have it over here. I'm going to copy it. So you can check out this code as well later on. It's just going to publish that to GitHub. So as I go over here, I can see this. I can actually try and deploy it, so this link here is of course available for the API. I can actually go ahead and try deploying directly from GitHub as well. So I mean, in my case, I don't have to use a separate organization. I can just go over, select one of my own repos that I have. So, we had this repo with us. That's what it's started 5. And we can just save that and have that run the deployment pipeline as well. So whenever, okay, for build, it seems to have set .NET 3.1. That's not what I had selected. Let me see. This kind of gets messy. It's always a good idea to look into your CI/CD ones. That always helps. I mean, I do have .NET 5 selected here. I'm not sure why it's deploying on .NET 3, but well, we have that in there. Anyway, never mind. This is gonna set up .NET for us. If it creates issues, I'm gonna re-explore this. But if it's a Swagger issue, we can actually just remove Swagger from there as well and try to deploy it. That's not a problem. That's definitely something which we can do. Okay, it seems like it's determining the projects to restore. It's the build that's happening. We're only getting a little trouble in the publish aspect. That's where we're running into issues with Swagger as well. It shows warnings on that end. Publish worked. Okay. Anything. The deployment was actually successful from the build was successful. Let's see if the deployment works now. It's downloading the artifact. It's probably this step where where we're trying to deploy to Azure Web Apps, where this is becoming a trouble for us. It's really cool though how I mean, if you're trying to deploy to Azure and you want to set up CI/CD to a GitHub repo, it automatically adds a GitHub action there for you, and it directly you don't need to worry about always creating a pipeline. There's a lot of stuff that Azure automates for us. I look at deployment center right now. We have quick starts here as well, and once this is set up, we can actually check out our deployment logs and when these builds are being attempted, which is actually is great. And it seems like the deployment worked. So it might have been just been an issue from Visual Studio and that deployment there. The deployment actually works for us. So I can use this app service link here for myself now, even if it doesn't work otherwise. Let's just, yeah. So as we created it earlier, the Swagger, it works for us, which is awesome. We can use it in the exact same ways just to test it out. Let's see if it's functioning. If the connection string had been added properly. And it had. We're getting the response properly. So yeah, our API is deployed and it works. So yeah, that was about it. That is what I wanted to discuss today. I personally had a great time here, sharing about this, creating a basic CRUD API for us. We utilized .NET, ASP.NET Core Web APIs. We used Azure SQL Server. There was a bit of entity framework there. And of course, we looked into how these deployments work on Azure. And I hope, this was a decent enough starter for you folks, to just help you get just a little bit excited about the .NET world, because it's such a powerful technology. Um, it powers some of the most amazing platforms and solutions all around the world. Stack Overflow runs on .NET, for example, and they manage over 5 million requests. So using just about 8 servers, I think that's how great um, .NET is. That's how powerful it is. And I definitely hope that some of you will try it out and use it and build some amazing projects. I would definitely love to look at those in the future as well. Just 1 second. I'm just bringing back my. Yeah, I think my screen should be visible. So
Yes, it
folks
is
just need
visible.
to hop over to adityaoberai.live. It's a little website that, where you can just know more about me, what I work with, different technologies, which communities I tend to be more active with. Um, yep. Also, as soon as this video link is published, that's gonna go up here as well. So, as this conference details are published, you can access those on my website directly as well. Beyond that, I actually have a few details here, so folks can just check out some of my content, some of my blogs, articles. There's of course a chunk of the videos that I do, some of the sessions that I've had. There's a nice number of those here, including some from my conferences, and my projects are up here. Funny thing, not actually funny, I mean, it's a cool thing, but in every single one of these you'll find some form of .NET. So that's definitely there. .NET is something I heavily use, and you'll find .NET all throughout these projects. In case you want to reach out to me, my website is here. You can find you can directly email me from here. You fill this up, you share your email, this reaches my email directly. And if you want to connect with me on my socials, my top socials, my primary socials, they're all accessible here. So, you can find my GitHub as well, my Twitter, my LinkedIn. So please feel free to connect with me. Make sure you mention that you reached out from this conference. If you do so, I'll definitely connect with you immediately. So yeah,